Well, good morning, good afternoon to you all. Hope you are having a great day. Welcome to Zyxel's Tech Talk. My name is Tri here from Zyxel. I am one of the senior product managers here. I've been here about 15, actually going on to the 16th year now. I've been in the networking industry for about 20. So glad to have you on our weekly interaction discussion forum here at Zyxel. The whole idea is just to make it, quick, informative, interactive as well. We want to cover an introduction about Zyxel. We're going to talk about the topic of discussion. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to open up into a Q&A section and be able to just interact and talk about a few things. So without further ado, just to do a quick check, just raise your hand if you can hear my voice. Just want to make sure that you're all here, awake, and available. So good to have you. Thank you again, Mark, Nolan, Paul. So let's go ahead and get started then. So Zyxel has been a company that's been around. We're celebrating our 30th year this year. We were established in 1989. We have over 700,000 businesses using Zyxel solutions right now, with over 100 million devices connecting globally in 150 markets, and we have over 1,500 employees. Now, a third of that workforce is Zyxel R&D and software engineers. So it's a pretty substantial where we put our focus into making the product and doing it well. So we offer a comprehensive commercial portfolio, products that range anywhere in the networking. Basically, when people ask, what do? We basically say that anything that's connected to a network, Zyxel has something. So security appliances that do UTM, VPN, traditional firewall functionalities, standalone wireless access points, and also cloud-based access points. LAN switches, so your core network with managed, unmanaged, fully POB, layer 2, layer 3. We have any kind of application that will fit in as well. Gateway devices for small businesses like routers, hotspot gateways, things that do terms of service. That's available there. And of course, wrapping it all together with network management, both in a standalone or in a cloud kind of solution. So that's a little bit about who Zyxel is and what we do. If you are new to us. So just to cover a little bit about what we're going to talk about in general, the market research in this particular topic that we're talking about, for IP surveillance in general, it's estimated in 2016, it was estimated at 5 billion, and it had a predicted growth of 20% annually between 2017 and 2024. Of course, now we've seen it even grow even further. Residential and industrial areas are pretty much the largest sectors that are growing, with residential applications expected to grow 25%. And we know that, things like home security and those kinds of networking for the home has increased, which actually drive a lot of that into the business sector, because people say, hey, I have this kind of IP camera security at home. So why can't I, get more of this to implement it into my small business where I may not have had it, necessarily before. So the IP surveillance PoE switch that we are introducing today is a kind of a new switch that addresses a lot of kind of issues and things like that. So some challenges that the surveillance market always had or is having really is one of which, there are a lot of people who have moved into the IP surveillance who come from the voice over IP network sector. I don't know how many of you guys are from primarily like the telecom, like, where that's maybe where you started and then moved into cameras and into networking itself. I think that's kind of the general trend, is that networking, our voice over IP customers or our partners are kind of forced into the networking side of things, even though they were more analog type. So they're having to build out networks and infrastructure that maybe is not something that they were used to in the beginning. So they've actually, a lot of those partners are merging into more of a managed service, networking company. So there's a lot of high costs, in upgrading those existing analog networks for the IP camera. So the infrastructure and then building out a network itself, having to have the expertise to build it. A lot of partners may, or at least new to the IP surveillance, may struggle with, how do I set up, a solid network that optimizes and makes sure that IP surveillance camera system is working optimally. Installers also need to put together a reliable power source. So they need to find a PoE switch to power all those cameras and doing it reliably. A lot of kind of pitfalls that we see from partners or maybe new partners to this market will just be picking, something off the shelf that you just buy on retail, something that has no management. Hardware is not of a good quality. And what ends up happening is the failure rate or the flexibility of managing those networks becomes a very difficult challenge. Now, the reason why a lot of those installers choose to pick those kinds of lower value, lower cost switches is that they just want to make sure that it works, but it's always a cost, and because they're sacrificing it like quality and cost, the network tends to be unstable. So either the design of the switch network is poor, and so the cameras aren't operating correctly, or they'll have jitter, lag, poor quality, or QoS, or they're overloading switches, or more importantly, they don't have enough power to power up enough the IP cameras in those networks. So a lot of times they're looking to use like PoE injectors, which are more costly. Obviously, you have a PoE injector in every kind of location, so it's not very cost effective in that regard. Now, surveillance installers also use different types of, when you are a professional, you actually use different types of features that maybe you're not used to. So there are features in a traditional switch, like something you find off the shelf, that may be way beyond the necessary needs of the IP surveillance market. And of course, it's hard to support non-PoE standard cameras with switches that are focused on and forced to use injection. So providing the flexibility, being able to use those kinds of cameras is really a challenge as well. Now, of course, these switches that Zyxel is releasing are 1300, coming kind of two flavors. They're unmanaged and also a managed set. So the GS 1300 10 HP models the 1300 models are unmanaged models. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the functionalities of even the unmanaged. But what it's really focused on is providing not only some features that will benefit the IP surveillance, but also a higher PoE budget. So you can see in this particular case, like the 1300-10 HP, it's 8 ports of PoE, but provides 130 watts. So that should be able to provide 15 watts or 15.4 watts on all the ports. Now, it also has support for 802.3 AAT as well. So it can still do 30 watts, but all within the budget. And it's set by consumption by default. Now, what consumption mode does for you is that it actually optimizes how much bandwidth, how much power is being consumed by the devices. So if, even though it may negotiate an AF signal for the IP camera, justifying or saying that, hey, I'm classified as a 15.4 watt device, the switch will only allocate what the camera is actually using. So let's say the camera is only using 12 watts. So the other 3 watts can actually be used elsewhere. So that's what the consumption mode does for you. So that's a big differentiator, compared to some of the competition out there who will just classify it as the max output. So then that just locks up your budget, especially if you're going to use like a 30 watt pan tilt zoom type surveillance cameras. And of course, you're going all the way up to the 24 port with additional power there as well. So with additional uplinks. So you have SFP uplinks in all of these scenarios. Typically they are combo ports. So they can be used both as a copper or as a fiber. And then of course, in the high powered PoE. So we also have another range that will be coming out soon after the set, that it will be managed, a fully managed set of switches, and you'll see that next. But one of the main features that this switch line offers is what we call extended range. It supports extended PoE ranging up to 250 meters at 10 megabits per second. So this is what the standard is to doing extended PoE. It's available both on the unmanaged and the managed versions. But in the unmanaged version, it's kind of a clever way to do it, right? The unmanaged switch, let me go back. The unmanaged switch doesn't have any particular ports. Any management GUI. So there's actually some dip switches Let me see if I can bring up my laser pointer here. There's some dip switches that you'll find here and on these other switches that can designate which ports have the extended range. So basically what you do is here, the extended range, if you just turn the dip switches in this particular order, on, off, off, that means that only port 1 will have that extended range power capability. And of course, if you go on, then it means ports 1 through 4, those are all available now for extended range. And it gives you that 250 meters, whereas traditional Ethernet only allows for you to go for data and power only 100 meters. So really, it gives you that extension for those hard to reach. It's not made to be done where everything is extended range, obviously, because there's only a limited port count in these cases. But it does give you that access to, hey, I have 1 or 2 access points that are just a little bit beyond my normal Ethernet. And rather than putting an extender switch right in the middle, just to kind of relay the signal and find power for that switch, and which is another one, another piece of potential failure, you can now go a much further distance. So 2.5 times the distance that you would normally go. So that's what those allow for you to do. Now, the cool thing about the unmanaged side, the management side, so the managed versions of these switches will actually let you power them via the GUI, and it happens on any of the ports. So you can choose any of the ports for that extended range. Of course, there are some limitations with the extended range, but we have a documentation and stuff like that on our test. And if you have any questions about using extended range, there are certain cameras that may have different, scenario issues, or just have to make sure that you have, Cat6 cabling through there. Otherwise, even using Cat 5, you should be okay. But it just depends on kind of the quality of the cable that you're using and the quality of the camera that you're using in order to support that extended range. But we do have that on all the models, so it gives you that reach. Now, these are the unmanaged surveillance switches. Sorry, these are managed switches. The GS1350 series, and it comes in a wide range. Now, you'll notice as well, before Zyxel's portfolio never had like a 16-port PoE switch. So here is now, this line allows for us to have 16-port PoE all the way down to even like a 4-port. So it's 5-port PoE with an additional uplink. So maybe 6 ports total there. It allows for you to also do on the GS1350-6HP up to 60 watts. So you can actually do the PoE++, so the VT standard there. Now, the other switches are primarily the AF and AT, and have, again, the power budgets that allow for every port to be minimal, 15.4 watts. So you can still power, majority of every, camera. If you have that one-off camera to do 30 watts, then you can still do that, especially with consumption mode. But the big, kind of the big deal is that all of these kind of port counts mirror what is available in a lot of the bundles that come with the IP cameras. So we're trying to match up again to that particular kind, that level of industry there. So yeah, there's also, so from the management standpoint, it gives you that web interface. So layer 2 web interfacing, as well as command line interface. And also in the future, we are going to have it available to be upgraded to Nebula. So if you guys are familiar with our Nebula cloud system, our cloud controller allows for you to, one point, single pane of glass, manage Zyxel switches, gateways, and access points under a single panel. So this will be part of that family and be flexed basically with the firmware upgrade. So you can choose whether it goes into the Nebula cloud and pay for both either licensing or free licensing, and or leave it in the standalone mode. So it depends on your scenario. I know a lot of partners who would appreciate this kind of management system, because the typical, IP surveillance tends to be a closed system. But now in this day and age, especially with a lot of cameras, systems actually going to the cloud or backing up or even sending data directly to the cloud for a cloud DVR, the idea of having a purely closed network is not as, not as typical, or is moving away from that. So some of the features that you do benefit and get from the managed version of these switches is, one, a very cool feature. It's called continuous PoE. That means that under certain situations, we will always guarantee that there's power delivered to those cameras. And of course, that means, not just cameras, but applications that use any kind of, security entrance like locks or keypads or, ID, RFID, fingerprint scanning, that kind of stuff. All those kinds of things that are powered by PoE will not get interrupted by power when, you do a reload of the configuration. Typically on a switch, when you do that, changing of configuration, you save it. There's certain things that when you implement it, it has to reload. So it, reboots the device, things like that. Or when you even return it to factory default, it will still maintain the power. So the power will continue to flow through to those cameras, allowing for those cameras to stay on and not have to reboot. Now, of course, traffic may not be sent, right? There might not be any traffic going on, but it does save you that reboot time of those cameras or of those devices. So those access can still be on and doesn't have to go through a further reboot on those things. Firmware, while you firmware upgrade, or even when you have an abnormal reboot for whatever reason, those scenarios will still maintain power to the device. Now, of course, if you unplug the device, then there's no saving that. We can't do anything about that. You can get also information about the camera. Again, like I mentioned, a lot of people end up using just unmanaged switches that give you just the power. So that's all they're kind of, depending upon. But when something happens within the network, like maybe poor quality, maybe the camera is actually down, there's kind of no idea or no visibility. All you see in a lot of those camera systems, I don't know how many of you guys noticed or seen, they have the monitoring system where you have each camera is like a square inside that monitor, right? And the only time something is down is you just see a black screen on a certain camera, but you don't know what's going on. You don't know, is it a network issue? Is it a camera issue? And the only thing that you could do is call up whoever is managing your camera, and they have to send somebody out to basically power cycle that port or something like that to see if the camera comes back on. So we have to physically do something about it. Now with the managed version, you actually can get some information about it. You can get the health of the device. You can get and see what the PoE draw is on it. You can see the information about it, like its IP address, if it's a connected IP camera, or the different connections of it, and see what kind of PoE and things like that. And later on, it's going to also be enhanced to see what kind of traffic is going on to kind of further its health. But you can see, just from the GUI there, you can see kind of the what is its health. Hey, it's green. That means it's working right. What is current PoE, even what it's called. So it can detect actually third party if those cameras support like LDAP and those system names, etc. We can find like an access camera and also map it to the IP address. So you can actually click through this link and get to the camera itself. And of course, you can then choose to even power cycle that port, or even try to reset, reset the device there. So if it's one of those things where you can get that visibility that you want. Now, the other cool feature that comes in the managed version is what we call auto camera recovery. Again, this is another feature that Zyxel has made particularly for the IP surveillance market. What it does is basically you can configure its auto detection. It can detect either by LLDP, so it can just, if the camera supports that, so it can automatically see it, or you can do it by IP address. So if you have the IPs mapped for those cameras, it can use a ping command from the device to find out, okay, well, it's going to poll it every 10 seconds in this particular scenario. The poll count is going to go by 2. If it fails those 2 polls, then it's going to either do, you can choose to go, hey, let's reboot it and alarm it, or just alarm. So the reboot and alarm allows for you to then, power cycle the device. So just to see if it comes back online. And there's a lot of parameters here as well that lets you customize what goes on. For example, you can resume the polling after 600 seconds. So basically after 10 minutes, you kind of let the device kind of reboot, everything's kind of back online. You can then recheck, it's polling again to see if, is it still available and things like that. And then of course, do you want to reboot more than once, or you just want to go through basically one cycle of that reboot before, anything else happens? And then the other cool thing that we've also added is to resume the power. So what resume power interval means is that when you unplug or when you power off the device via PoE, it's like when you unplug your computer, you want to wait and make sure that it's discharged for, let's say, 10 seconds. Make sure all the power is gone before it boots back up, right? So that's in essence what the switch is doing. It's gonna turn off the PoE on that port and then wait 10 seconds before it powers it back on again. So it's kind of the same thing that you would do as a technician. So it's almost like replacing a virtual replacement of an engineer going out there. So you don't have to roll the truck just to reboot the device. You can now do it remotely. So you can see if the blank spot on the monitor screen comes back online or not. And of course, the product also has been, kind of optimized and increased in terms of the surge protection that's available. So it's 4 times the normal standard that's available. The GS1350 also has enhanced electrostatic discharge protection as well. So it's made because, devices are cameras and they typically are either outdoor or very close to outdoor. So we want to be able to protect the network and the switch as well. So we have those surge protection capabilities available. So these are some of the specs, just kind of side by side. Things to notice is, of course, the power supply. Everything is internal power supply except for the 5-port because it's really small. There's a power brick that is outside. So in those cases, it's okay, but it allows for you to have these options. But majority of them, all of them are, except for that one, is internal power supply. You notice the power budgets are very high. If you actually put side by side these switches with like our web managed switches, you'll notice that it's pretty high powered compared to what you would typically find in that kind of class of a switch. Like for example, the 1300 10 HP with 130 watts. In that kind of class switch, typically you only need 60 watts, or it only comes with 60 or 70 watts. Now, here's kind of the differences between this surveillance switch, which is made for IP camera installers, versus a switch that your typical voice over IP installer has. Voice over IP doesn't need typically a lot of power. A lot of the handsets use maybe 7 to 12 watts, whereas the cameras are actually pushing the higher range. It's using, closer to 15 watts. And then of course they have pan tilt zooms that go higher, right? So you have on one end, the voice over IP installer who just wants a switch that has, that is very cost effective, which means it has a low power budget, which is more than enough that they need. And then on this IP surveillance one, you're trying to use those same commercial switches, in these scenarios, but you're finding out, hey, there's not enough power. So we're moving those, we're allowing for these kinds of switches to now be the right fit, really the perfect fit for IP surveillance. How soon in 2020 for Nebula is remotely managed? R. Sanders has a question. How is it remotely managed in the meantime? Right now it is managed via, basically it's web GUI. So the unmanaged versions obviously is unmanageable. The managed version you do with your typical web, so like a web managed, or you can do it through CLI. So these are kind of unique that it has both the web and the CLI. So it operates much like our full layer 2 managed switch. And the support is in 2020. It's probably like early 2020. So we're already halfway through this year almost. So probably within the next 9 months, I would say, is when Nebula Flex will be available. And of course, though, if there is demand, when you guys are feedbacking to us, if there is a huge push to go to Nebula Flex, then that will actually accelerate the process. So right now we're really gathering the feedback, because one of the arguments that is out there is that typically for IP surveillance, like I mentioned earlier, it is it typically is a like a closed system, right? So typically people don't build a network that is managed outside. But like I said in earlier, there is more of that trend where people are more comfortable moving that kind of management and things that they're doing into the cloud, because their DVRs and things like that are all in the cloud or backed up in the cloud. And of course, they're having to punch a hole via VPN or something like that into the network to manage those devices anyway. So technically, it is being remote managed. Now, if we push this all to the cloud through Nebula, it actually would make it super easier for a somebody who may not know how to build a VPN tunnel into the network, or that's not really their expertise, this will allow for you to get that kind of security, that kind of access, and that kind of provisioning, to be able to install hundreds of switches at once if you'd like, with really just a click of a button to attach the switches to that Nebula. So give me those feedbacks. I mean, my argument with headquarters is that this is where we want to go, and we know that Nebula Flex is going to be where customers will want to gravitate to. So we just need to hear it actually from you guys. So send me that email, reach out to your sales, whatever it is. My email is try@zyxel.com. Send me that, and so that I can go, hey, you know what? There are a lot of partners who are excited about the IP surveillance switches, and they want to see it on Nebula. So let's make that push, because we have the technology, and all of our other web managed and managed switches are going to Nebula anyway. So it kind of seems like the natural fit. So I think that argument that we have, or that we hear about, where it's more of a closed system, it's probably going to be moving away from that. That's what I think. So yeah. So also the other thing too is the hardware features. It's a little bit of a difference right now, because of really the unmanaged switch is made about very budget conscious. I just need PoE to power up my cameras, be as cost effective as possible. Those don't have the additional surge protection, because those obviously add cost to the components and how it's made. And then the way that the extended range works in the unmanaged is different, right? You have the dip switches that are there versus the managed switches is all software. Now, both of them do allow for you to have a wider range of operation as well. Typically, our products are like, 0 to 40 degrees Celsius, but this particular has a wide range of -20 to 50 degrees Celsius. So it goes a little bit further in terms of its temperature range. And one feature that the managed version has is what we call last good. It's a last good button. What that means is, I don't have a slide for that, but basically you can, let me go to this, maybe I could explain it a little better. Basically on the port, there's actually a dip switch, not a dip switch, but a button, like a reset button that you're used to. And you actually can configure what configuration will be activated when you push that reset button. So let's say you do the install, you go to the location, you do the install, you've configured how you want the QoS to be, which ports have what kind of functionality, what has extended range, things like that, and you save it, right? And that's your like known good first install, everything is worked out kind of configuration. What you then do is you copy that into basically the customer default. So this is your default. So when somebody actually goes, and either a technician, or even when you have your customer maybe do it, to just push that reset button, using a pin or whatever it is, rather than it going to a factory default, it goes to the default that you had just configured there. So maybe in a year, for whatever reason, somebody changed something and something's messed up, and you knew it worked in the day one, you push that reset and it goes back to what it was day one. So that's kind of what that last good button does for you. And then of course, we have some early samples that have come in as well. If you'd like to join the test of the unmanaged version, so this is not the layer 2 managed with CLI and web management. This is if you want to just test out the technology to power up your devices for your cameras, be able to test the extended range functionality, with the dip switches and things like that. Let us know. We have samples that we can send out to you to begin your field trials and testing those out. Now the product's going to be available within the next month in terms of the unmanaged. So I think it's launching in about July. And then in August will be the unmanaged version, and we'll actually announce it in September to be widely available. But all of our partners can get access to those units early on, again, just to test, and also to start building out your first projects and things like that. So jump on it soon. Let us know if this is something that is interesting to you. Reach out to your sales rep, of course. And if you haven't been a partner, or if you're not currently a partner with Zyxel, I encourage that you do that, because there's a lot of benefits that come along with that. Of course, the discounts is there. What we do, especially for this particular product, is that we're actually going to maintain the visible street price. So things that are online, things like whatever it may be, it's going to be at a high price. And so we're actually going to give all of back-end rebates and things like that and additional discounts to our partners. So the partners will get the discounts in order to make much larger margins than you would typically would do on a kind of a typical, switch device. So you get those extra discounts just being a partner, and there's no cost to being a partner with us. And the entry of maintaining your partnership is actually very low compared to what you would, sell. But for silver, for a half a year period, you just have to maintain $6,000 in sales. If you want to move up to our highest tier, which is our gold tier, you have to go to 12K every 6 months. So that's really just a few switches, probably mostly one or two projects for that entire half year would pay for, or would be, would allow for you to maintain these kinds of levels. But of course, the gold tier gives you that 20% off of distributions prices. You get other things like lead referrals, access to the sales engineers, advanced replacement, things like that. We want to be able to work with you to provide a, kind of an access where you call us, we help you to decide what's the best application or what's the best product solutions for that application, what to use, good, better, best, and then of course, figure out what's the best route to get those things installed. And of course, if you need help in configuring them as well, we will help to do that. We also have paid services for configurations, but also free training and things like that. So take advantage of all of that. So that really kind of concludes the time here in terms of the information part. I'm going to switch it over to the Q&A section. I see a couple of questions also from RW Sanders and also Nolan. So let's see, RW says, for people that are accessing the NVR for viewing remotely, remote support of Switch itself is a natural progression. Yeah, that's true. So that's definitely one way. I feel that people are moving that way anyways, right? They're getting used to things being offsite or being able to manage. Now, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, most of the installers, or a lot of the installers, have come from kind of the voice over IP space. And before then they were in the analog telecom. So they are, kind of newer to the networking side, and then now trying to figure out, how do I, set up a fully kind of secured network switch that I can manage, get those kinds of visibility, so that they're not lost in kind of in the technology. So Nebula, I think, is a natural progression, because it allows for you to not really have to think about, how do I get access to it? I just, scan the device, install it, and it goes and just talks to the cloud, and I just see it through it on a web GUI that I can access on my phone, on my computer, wherever it may be, right? So I could do all that through the Nebula cloud. Thank you for that comment. How does the price point compare to the GS series? So the normal GS series, let's say it's at this level, it's going to be probably like 20%, I think, above that, again, just to maintain a gap. I think it's like 20 or 30%. Compared to maybe it's comparable, again, because of the power is also increased. It's a specialized switch, so it has a different ID design. It's a different model as well, but primarily it's so that it can give you room. So even though it may be online for a certain price, you're able as a partner to add value to that, getting a bigger discount. So you can offer to your customer equal or even less than the online price and still be able to make your margins. You have a situation. Oh, RW also made a comment. Oh, thanks to Nolan for that previous comment. RW Sanders has another question. You have a situation right now where troubleshooting offline cameras is a huge problem. Yeah, so definitely some of these features that allow for you that management visibility, even though it may not be in the Nebula cloud right now, will still access and give you visibility to things that you maybe had not have access before, right? Where you would have to send a truck out to see what's going on. Now with that GUI, you can see, well, there seems to be no power going to that device, right? There's no draw on it. So either it's dead, or you can at least do a power cycle via the GUI and see if it comes back online. If it still doesn't come back online, maybe the cable is either unplugged or the camera itself is actually dead, right? So you can do that initial troubleshooting, and maybe a lot of the times it's just the reboot and it comes back online and then you're good to go. And it saves you a truck roll, especially in some places where you have to drive a far place just to go there and go like, oh, power cycled it and it's good, right? And it's hard to say, it's hard to tell like the IT on the local prem to say, hey, can you just reboot the whole switch, right? Because then now all of your cameras are going to go down during that period of time. And if he doesn't do it right or whatever, you might run into a problem. Then all of a sudden you still have to roll a truck out there and get that all fixed. So also selectable features when then best of both worlds. Doesn't know what, can leave it disabled. Yeah, there's a lot of those features that you can also not use, of course. So when will Managed be shipping? It will be shipping probably in the August timeframe for the initial kind of batches. So if you have demand for those, again, reach out to your sales rep on potentially how many of those kinds of switches, or which models. I do have a question, because that's almost one of the. I have a question for you. You type it into the chat box for me. Is typically, what is your go-to kind of port count, right? Is it on the lower end, 10 port, 8 port PoE? Is it 16 port? Is it 24 port? Which one of those, when you're doing IP surveillance, which one is your typical? Because we do get our range. We have some customers who just say, I only do kind of bigger installs, so I'm kind of stuck with the 24. And then some say I'm on the low end. So my question is the 16 port something that is a bigger demand? Because especially when I'm having to work on forecasting, I'm having to predict, what is going to be the go-to. And if only a few partners respond to me, then it's kind of skewed to what they are, providing me. But I kind of want to get a general idea. A lot of people say the 8 port kind of switch or the 10 port is like, sometimes it's just too little. You just need those extra 1 or 2 ports. So that's where the 16 port comes into play. So, okay, so Nolan says 10 to 16. So that makes sense. So this again will be kind of that perfect fit, something that Zyxel actually didn't have, right? In that 16 port range, gives you that extra flexibility in between. So that's good to know. 4 to 12 cameras is normal, according to Mark. So thank you, Mark. Yeah, so it seems like that's pretty much the case. Probably less often do you have a 24 port, that kind of high concentration now, though that might change, right? How many of you guys are doing more like PoE enabled like access panels, fingerprint access, those kinds of things, right? There's a lot of those peripherals now that are using it, and it's kind of encompassed into the IP surveillance. It's all part of that physical security, network access, so or physical access kind of function or application. So more ports may be necessary, even though it may not draw the power, but you may have 4 to 12 cameras, but then you have another like 6 access panels, so that could be your 24 port switch on a single. And especially now with extended range for those cameras, you can have further reach as well, so you can still get 1 or 2 more cameras where you didn't typically have before. So it is a balance. So we'll see how the market moves and we'll shift, but definitely let your sales rep know as we are doing the forecasts for these numbers for July and August for these kinds of switches and beyond, what kind of quantities typically you would do, or what do you use now, right? If you're using a competitor, if you're using Zyxel, are those switches that you're using for IP surveillance going to move to this kind of switch? If so, again, reach out to us, because then we can then make sure that we have enough product, we have the right products mix as well for what you're doing, to make sure that we support that when it's available. So I'm excited about the switch, because it is something that is more niche per se in the Zyxel market. But I could already see that this kind of switch, even though it's made for IP surveillance, honestly, I would use this also for access points, because it still has all of your VLANing capabilities, QoS, your typical stuff that you would need for IPCAM, and it's going to give you, for access points, and it gives you more power. It also then gives you those reboot detection capabilities. So it's going to be able to reboot those if it can't detect that the AP is there anymore. So it seems like it's a very, kind of natural way to do it, even though it's primarily made for the IP surveillance segment. But I think some of these features will be beneficial for even those kinds of applications with wireless. So Jared mentioned that 16 and 48 are used. So currently there isn't a 48 port model, but I think if there is further demand for a concentrated 48 port for IP surveillance, I think the big chunk is how do you get 48 ports with PoE all enabled? Because I think our standard here is to try to make sure that all the ports are PoE. So in those particular cases, it may be more rare than we would probably have to suggest that you use two 24-port switches to do that. Great, fantastic. I think that is it for now. Again, if there are no other questions, or if you have questions after you think about it, email me at tri at zyxel.com, and I will point you in the right direction, or I will help to answer those questions. I will look forward to the next time. We do have a partner intro coming up in June next week on Tuesday. And also the other one is Sean Rogers will be presenting a voice over Wi-Fi using Nebula. So that's on June 11th. So sign up for that, Tech Talk. Until next time, again, appreciate your choosing of Zyxel, or even your interest in Zyxel. Again, hope that you are a partner, and we look forward to working with you and being your networking ally. And we'll see you again at another Zyxel Tech Talk. Talk to you soon.